Valentine Dessertenne, producer at Illogika, and today I'm here to talk to you about AR games we've developed for kids and the lessons learned we got from there, so essentially a short case study, if you will. So first of all, who am I? That's my huge face right there, if you don't see it here. I'm a producer at Illogika. Over there, I've shipped more than 10 games and projects over the last 4 years, and before that, I was working over in the tech scene. Who is Illogika? So we're a 40 people game studio based in Montreal. We were founded in 2009, so been around for a little while. We develop mainly using Unity, and we do work for hire projects for larger studios, smaller studios as well, but that's our specialty. So we recently worked on Cuphead, for example, to help them ship the game, worked on Lara Croft's Go, Hitman Go, a bunch of projects with Square Enix. We also develop our own IP and games, including Sumeria, which recently launched. A little bit of shameless self-promotion here. It's our first IP. We launched May 9th, so a couple of weeks ago, on PS4, Xbox One, and Steam, so feel free to go check it out. Now, so kind of the game that I'm going to use as a base for these lessons learned is Skywhale AR. It's a game we developed with Nickelodeon as an add-on mode to their existing Skywhale game, which was a 2D game that we took and added an AR 3D mode to it. It's part of the Game Shakers world, if you're familiar with it. It's a TV show where little girls create games, and they ship them on the App Store like Skywhale. And here's the brief trailer of the game to give you an idea of how it plays. Ooh, this is not what it's supposed to look like. Oh, there we are. So this is the original game, which was 2D, kind of, you would control the whale to go as far as possible and get to, and beat your high score. And then we developed the AR mode, which is appearing right there, which is a 3D mode where players go both over and underwater in augmented reality to catch as many items as possible in a limited amount of time. Awesome. So yeah, it's a really fast arcade-style game with both a race mode where players try to grab as many items as possible and a roam mode where they can just explore the world in augmented reality with the little purple whale you just saw. And the main feature is that players interact over water and under a water plane that they can dive to and surface up from as they will during the game. It launched in April 2018, so really recently. So just, if you're not familiar, to give a brief overview of AR today, Apple and Google are kind of really leading the way. They each have their own SDKs, AR Core for Android, AR Kit for Apple and iOS. AR is really interesting to brands and for games right now because it allows for a lot of engagement. Having characters and items within your own world is super interesting for companies. The drawbacks are massive battery costs. Having a camera feed on all the time is really taxing on devices. And right now also with phones that have tiny screen, immersion is still kind of low because your viewpoint is so limited, but that's going to improve over time. So now onwards to the lessons learned and challenges and the solutions we implemented for them. So with AR games, especially the type we're developing, fatigue plays a big role. So holding up a device for a really long time can be tiring on the arms, especially for small children with their weak little arms. It's hard to hold up a phone. So to combat fatigue, we opted to have very limited screen interaction. So the game is mainly played by holding the phone or tablet with two hands, and there's very little tapping of buttons, so people don't have to take off their hand and tap, which is even more tiring holding the phone with just one hand. All the interactions are on the edges of the screen, so that you can just move your thumb over and tap. We focused on the gameplay on device movement, so no tapping, and we did very short play sessions. So a play session would average around a minute, which is the right amount of time to be able to kind of run around and then sit down, interact with the shop, play the 2D version of the game, and then rest up and go again. Another challenge we had was especially with movement. So as I mentioned, the game is played by moving around with your tablet and walking around. It feels really counterintuitive because if you're a kid, your mom is probably telling you to sit down when you're playing with your tablet and not run around with it. And also after playing a game that's in 2D, that's like a sitting game, and then switching to AR mode, it can be really weird to make that change. So to do that, we had two solutions. The first one was to directly encourage the player to move around. So whenever they would boot up the AR mode, they would get this screen, which is super visual, like you have to stand up and you have to run around to play. And our second, which was more for the safety of actually moving around, was that we limited the movement to a closed space within the game, with barriers appearing when the player moved too far. So we would have an anchor in the middle that spawned an area about the size of a regular room, standard room, and barriers would appear in the game when the kids went too far. So like here you see that barriers are appearing over there, and they're being prompted to go back towards the center of the room. Okay. Another challenge is limited compatible devices. So AR support is growing all the time, but it's still not every device that supports the AR SDKs. There's not much we can do about hardware. So for us, we opted to make AR really an option within the game and not a requirement, so that kids and people who didn't have access to AR-compatible devices could still play, get a full game experience out of the 2D game. And we also put all the content that we had added in AR and 3D mode, we put it in the 2D, in the 2D version of the game as well. So here you can see this button, the AR button. It would only pop up if the device that the person was playing on was compatible. And if it's not, it's just not there, so at least it's not like gated or anything like that. So another issue we ran into is obviously the unreliable tracking. AR tech is still pretty early, so tracking is not always perfect, and some environments are just really hard to track in. Like in our office, we have super shiny floors and desks, and the tracking was really all over the place there. And especially for the gameplay we were using, where you're moving the tablet and phone around all the time, it really disrupts the tracking. So to do that, to kind of combat that, we use tracking, especially surface tracking, as really something to improve gameplay, but not necessary to successfully play the game. So, for example, we had props like corals popping up when players were underwater, and those were popped up on places where we thought there was a surface. But if we couldn't find any surfaces, we would just assume where the floor was, pop the corals there. And yeah, in that way, it was never a negative experience, but it could be a positive plus to have functional surface tracking. Also, we focused on tracking actual device movement to move the whale around rather than specific surfaces, because that's the one that works the least well. So like here you can see those corals over there are the props that were spawned because we tracked the floor in this shot. Depth perception. So depth perception in AR is a bit of a challenge because you're essentially faking 3D on a 2D camera feed, which can be a bit tricky. So for this, we had really three approaches. The first, that we added drop shadows to every item that was flying in the air, so that the drop shadow would be on the water or on the floor where the item was, so it was really much easier to find it. Distant items were very desaturated, so almost like they were in a fog, so that players weren't paying too much attention to them because they were far. And close items would glow when they were collectible. So if a player was close enough to an item to grab it, it would start to glow so that they could go and get it. So here's a quick, very high quality GIF to show you those features. So I'm just gonna wait for it to loop. So you see the items that start glowing as soon as the whale gets near to them. And as well as the drop shadows on like that banana and that not that ice cream, it's too close. And all of the other items over there, as well as that turtle over there, which is slightly desaturated, and then as we get closer, it becomes much clearer. I'm just gonna grab a sip of water while we watch the shift. Okay, scale was also another issue that we encountered. Much like in VR and AR, it doesn't take much for scale to feel off and for the experience to be kind of not necessarily nauseating because it's such a small window, but not comfortable. So for example, if you're moving with your iPad, you would expect everything to move towards you at the same speed as you're walking towards it. So for this, I don't really have any special tips. I would just say if you're developing AR games, take into consideration that it might take you a while to get that scale right, so have some development time put away to do that. Finally, the size of the screens. So as I was mentioning earlier, phone screens are pretty tiny, so for AR it's not super immersive. We prefer tablets and encourage people to use tablets, but don't get to decide what devices people have, and we can make a lot of changes to hardware. So what we opted was just to use really clear, minimal UI that reads really well on the screen so that people could actually experience AR rather than have UI cluttered everywhere and just see the augmented reality on their screen and focus on that. So this is what the UI looked like in the final version. So as you can see, it's really simple, big button to go below or over water, point, time, and pause menu, really keeping it streamlined. So, conclusion, if you can take away 3 points from this, it would be to really, when you're developing an AR, keep play sessions short and really like exciting for that small amount of time that people are playing and interacting in augmented reality. Focus on legible, simple gameplay, like really simple actions, so moving around the character and just grabbing items, really simple, really easy to pick up. As well as UI, simple, legible UI is a must. And also, you know, the AR still has a long time to go and to grow, so really embrace the technological limitations and make that a feature if you can. And yeah, just know it's going to improve as time goes forward. So that's it for me. Let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so any questions, guys? I think the scale thing is something I'm kind of mostly interested in. I'm working on of all things, an AR location-based first-person shooter. Funded by blockchain. I have all the buzzwords. It's called Reality Clash, and so we have this kind of issue. We're cheating because we're going to put it into because it's shooting in real space. We don't want to have the whole school shooting kind of thing. We want to try and make sure that doesn't happen. So we're putting it in a virtualized world. Mm-hmm. But we still have the same issue, which is we want there to be, where we've got real world objects like buildings, mm-hmm. we want them to be relatively in position. And so that scaling thing I think is a really kind of big challenge. Do you think other people are going to have that same sort of issue of making sure that you've got data points and you're moving, but you can't guarantee that the combination of camera and GPS is going to give you enough accuracy to be able to do that in any way that's useful? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an issue already, and it's just going to be a bigger issue as AR becomes more and more actually immersive with like headsets and things like that, where it's just going to be, you're going to feel dizzy, like they struggled with it in VR as well. It's like if the tracking is off by a bit or the scale is off by a bit, things feel weird. So yeah, I think it's definitely going to be an issue and a bigger issue moving forward.
And again, we found that was interesting. We're placing these artificial people on spaces, but of course with ARKit and AR Core, they're looking for a flat plane, mm-hmm. and a flat plane could be a windowsill. Yeah. And so and especially if you've got distance, we want characters to be at distance. So we have these like tiny characters that are actually in a distance, mm-hmm. but they're appearing on a window ledge, so they look like they're tiny people rather than looking like real big. Dev problems, I know, but I mean, I think you're right. The bottom line is we're experimenting, aren't we? It's a hugely early period of time, and I think what you were showing there is how important it is to get that experience right and find these little subtle twists that, like drop shadow, which really make it pop out. I've talked too much. There's a question over there.
Hello, the question I have is, so you added this as a feature. So what difference did it make in the whole gameplay experience versus just running it as a feature? Like, what is the main thing that you tracked by adding this feature?
That we what? Sorry.
What is the measure, like in a fun aspect of engagement? Like, what is the thing that you are measuring with the AR gameplay mode?
So we don't do the tracking because this was developed for Nickelodeon, so I can't really answer your question, unfortunately, on our end. Yeah, I don't really have an answer for you. I'm sorry.
Well, it's a tricky one generally anyway, isn't it? Trying to work out how do you measure fun.
Yeah.
They come back as the easiest one.
Was it hard finding children testers, and was there any challenges with the children being able to read the directions on screen?
No, it was pretty easy finding kid testers. I mean, there's a lot of people in the studio who have kids that they'll let us use as guinea pigs, so that's great. So for the reading of the instructions, we had very minimal on-screen writing. So the UI card that I showed earlier, where the kids have to stand up and play, that's probably the most text you'll see in the entire application. So that wasn't really a problem. We did have lengthy tutorials at the beginning that we totally booted because it was just too much text and kids weren't paying attention to it. So yeah, we cut down for sure, but the small amount of text we did, they were able to read it pretty effectively. It's also, I have to verify this, but the application is, I think, 7 years, 7 to 12 is the target. So they know how to read pretty well at that point.
Yeah, I'm working on I'm helping a team that's got a British TV character. Sorry, well, it is a TV character, but it's a traditional old school novel character, Peter Rabbit. And they're making a very simple app for 5 to 6 year olds. And, they're having to simplify everything right down, obviously, because they can't guarantee, well, it's not that they can't guarantee reading. In fact, actually, that's part of the kind of desire is to create stories that you can share with your parents. But the key focus there is not just the parent, so not just the child, it's the parent relationship. And I think one of the key issues is how we build games for kids that take into account not just the fact that we have a commercial relationship with the parent, but we have an entertainment relationship with the child and the parent. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really tough dynamic for, particularly for indie teams. I think it's often an instinct, I think, for indie teams to try and make games for kids. And as a marketeer, it's the hardest, nastiest thing to try to do because there's so much legal and support work you've got to cover on top of making a game. So I tend to try and suggest to people not to do that, but they rarely listen. Anyway, not that it's bad doing kids' games, far from it. It's great, but it's just you got to be careful. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Cool. Any more questions? Last chance? In which case, I'm going to say thank you very much.
Thank you.